Former President Trump's endorsements are paying off for some, but not for all candidates in primaries around the country. For a look at some of the major races decided overnight, I want to bring in political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. She is following all of this from Capitol Hill for us. So, Caitlin, South Carolina Congressman Tom Rice lost to the Republican primary, to a candidate backed by former President Trump. What went wrong for him?
Hey, Anne-Marie. Well, what's significant about this race is, remember, there were 10 Republicans in the House that voted to impeach Donald Trump after the insurrection on January 6th. Well, about half of them are retiring, but 6 of them are running for re-election, and Tom Rice was one of them. And he lost his primary last night to a Trump-backed challenger. Now, his district is a very conservative district, which is a little bit different from another South Carolina race that we're going to be talking about. But for Tom Rice, what was interesting about his strategy was that he never backed down from his impeachment vote. He was very defiant about that vote and argued that, look, I voted with Donald Trump. I supported Donald Trump. I voted for his policies in Congress. This is not an election that Trump is waging against me because of policy differences. It's essentially a vendetta against me for voting to impeach him. So he was very defiant in his race, and his main challenger, it was a crowded primary, but his main challenger was a state representative, Russell Fry, who was endorsed by former President Trump. And this was really a way for the former president to run kind of a revenge campaign against someone who voted to impeach him. And Russell Fry ended up winning the primary outright. There were a lot of questions going into last night about whether this would go into a runoff, but the idea that he was defeated outright shows a lot about how in these conservative Republican districts, how defying Donald Trump and continuing to, support that stance could cost you your seat. This is the first Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump who lost their primary this season.
So on the flip side, you mentioned another race in that state, Congresswoman Nancy Mace. She managed to survive the primary despite going on against another lawmaker with former President Trump's endorsement. So why was she able to hang on?
Well, Vlad, this was a little bit of a different dynamic in this district. First of all, this is a district that is much more competitive in the general election. Nancy Mace won in 2020 by just 1 point. She defeated a Democrat in that race who had flipped that seat in 2018. So it's a little bit more of a moderate district, has some independents and actually some Democratic voters there. So what her strategy was very different from what we saw from Rice. First of all, Nancy Mace, while she was very critical of Donald Trump and the insurrection when she came into Congress in 2020, she started to kind of moderate her stance a little bit. Remember, after Donald Trump endorsed her primary opponent, Kate Arrington, she went to Trump Tower in New York and filmed a video outside of it, essentially saying, look, I was a Trump supporter, I support his policies still, kind of changing her tune on the former president. I actually interviewed Nancy Mace last night on Red and Blue, and I asked her about whether this race would show the power of a Trump endorsement, and she said, look, essentially endorsements only go so far. This is a more competitive seat, and to have someone be able to win this seat in November, you have to have someone who can attract more moderate Republican votes. And so it's important to note that while these two candidates in South Carolina had very different strategies in approaching the former president, their districts are also pretty different in terms of what the electorate looks like. So Mace was able to hang on against a Trump-backed challenger who denied the election results. Tom Rice, however, lost his seat.
And now taking a look at Nevada's Senate primary, Nevada's former Attorney General Adam Laxalt has made it to the general election. He was also endorsed by Donald Trump, but his opponent, Sam Brown, had a similar political platform. So what exactly put him over the top?
Well, there are a couple different dynamics in this race. First of all, Laxalt had run for governor before, and his grandfather was the governor of Nevada. So his last name he has name recognition in the state, especially in Republican Party politics. But he did have that endorsement from former President Trump and touted that as a big part of his campaign. And that goes to show that in a lot of these Republican primaries, there's not a ton of policy differences. It's really kind of who you have support from. And in some of these races, Donald Trump's endorsement helps you turn out base voters that you need in a Republican primary. But he goes on to the general, and this is going to be one of the most closely watched Senate races in the country because Democrats need to hang on to this seat in order to maintain their majority in the Senate.
As we know, Laxalt will take on the incumbent Democratic senator, that is Catherine Cortez Masto, in November. Is it likely that that seat will stay blue, or is it anyone's race right now?
Well, this is going to be a big question heading into this midterm. This is going to be one of the most watched general election contests. Cortez Masto is the Democratic incumbent, and this is a seat, of course, that Democrats have had, but also a state that President Biden won. And so you're going to see a lot of kind of national dynamics play into this race. The Republicans are talking about inflation, the economy, a lot of cultural and social issues. Democrats are, talking about, national democratic issues. Cortez Masto is really trying to localize this race, however, and kind of trying to, in some ways, distance herself from the liabilities that a lot of Democrats are having. If Republicans are able to flip this seat, they could be well on their way to gaining the majority in Congress.
And you're watching the Secretary of State race in Nevada, of course, because the Secretary of State is the person that oversees elections. So it makes a big difference. And we know what happened in Nevada, recount, blah, blah, blah. What can you tell us? Was there a recount in Nevada, or am I mixing that up with Arizona? Arizona, sorry. That did the wrong state, but right region. What can you tell us about that race?
Right. Well, what's significant about this is that the person who won the Republican nomination has been an election denier and said that he wouldn't have certified the election in Nevada if he were in that position. And it goes to show, Anne-Marie and Vlad, that we're talking about these January 6th hearings that we're having up here on Capitol Hill. And we're wondering kind of what is the public to take away from these hearings? Are they paying attention? And the biggest thing that I've been arguing is that what happened on January 6th and the president, knowing that he lost, but organizing people to overturn the election anyway, that's a dynamic that's still playing out in Republican primaries and into the general election. And I think that's really important to underscore here, that not only you have a lot of, Republican-based voters believing this, but you also have candidates for federal office or for local offices that will oversee elections touting, running on, and denying that the 2020 election was legitimate. And so that's a really important thing to watch here. Remember, in Pennsylvania, too, we saw the Republican nominee for governor. He's a top election denier, and he would pick the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania who would oversee elections. So this is a dynamic that is still going on today. In some sections of the Republican Party, it's become something of an organizing principle. And we saw that play out in Nevada in this Secretary of State race.
Yeah, you mentioned the Pennsylvania race. He's a guy also who has floated the idea of the state picking their own electors.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, and well, I'm sure that's something we'll talk about as all these races heat up. Caitlin, thank you.
Thank you.